Well, joining me is Colin D. Ellis, who is a keynote speaker and author of Culture, Fix and the Project book. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Colin.
Thank you, Jaynie. Great to be on.
Great to see you. Now, in your book, you actually discuss the way in terms we work, culture being the biggest topic globally right now. Can you actually draw any parallels with what we heard from Joe Biden's speech this week regarding behaviour and the treatment of our colleagues?
Well, I think we've seen it already, Jaynie. For those of us who actually watched Anthony Fauci's press conference yesterday, it was a completely different Anthony Fauci than one we'd seen before, someone who was a little bit more relaxed, who didn't feel the pressure of maybe toxic leadership that, has been in place for the last 4 years. And I think that, what we saw quite obviously there was a real shift in culture. And I think, the events of 2020 have really got organizations, finally made organizations realize that actually the way to succeed, the way to pivot, the way to survive is by treating employees with dignity and respect and giving them the opportunity to define the culture that they need to be successful.
So what is not acceptable anymore, and what's some of the latest research that we've seen in terms of how leadership has changed?
Well, I think, every year we see research that talks about the reasons for organizations, for people leaving organizations. In one report last year, 58% of people said that they left the organization because of the culture that leaders had created. They felt that leaders hadn't done enough to create the kind of culture that enabled them to be able to be the best version of themselves. And I think, for too long, Jaynie, for the last 15, 20 years, I think leaders have walked past some of the kinds of behaviours that have, really undermined the safety in our workplace cultures, which has led to this kind of fear of bullying and all manner of horrible things. And we saw Australian companies, people like Rio Tinto, QBE, fell foul of that last year as well. And so I think leaders have got a responsibility this year to reset the expectations, because the world is a very different place behaviourally, not only of leadership teams, but of employees as well.
Has the pendulum swung too far, or do we really need this?
No, it's not swung too far. We really need this. I think that, workplace culture is one of those things, Jaynie, where people don't really understand it. Senior managers are great at talking about it. What we want is a vibrant culture. Yes, culture's the number one most important thing. I spoke to one organisation last year who spent more on photocopiers than they did on addressing the behaviours of their senior managers. And so I think it's time to start calling out some of those things that are just not acceptable. I think that organisations for too long have tolerated brilliant jerks, people who are technically very good at what they do, or they have a long history of technical expertise, but are just jerks in the office who simply don't know how to behave, and consequently give rise to fear, harassment and bullying.
So in terms of work culture, what are some of the things that we need to set up in the organisations to improve things?
Well, I think first and foremost, what leaders need to do is to actually define the culture. They need to put that in the hands of the people that own it. Culture is the sum of everyone's attitudes, beliefs, behaviours, traditions and skills. It doesn't belong to a leadership team. It belongs to the staff. And so I think, by defining the cultural expectations, and that's behaviours, how we're going to work together, and really importantly, the different personalities within the team. We don't take enough time to think about how people should be communicated to. We use this one size fits all of everybody gets an email, or we do everything, kind of in a meeting format. And I think CEOs particularly need to be more visible. I think that's something that we saw in 2020. We saw greater visibility. We saw more vulnerability, which is a good thing. Brené Brown talks about this a lot. She calls vulnerability as a superpower, where senior leaders can open their doors and demonstrate that they're human beings just like everybody else, but also that they're good at listening, not just talking, but listening as well. So that real commitment to culture, compassion, empathy, taking the time to understand things from other people's perspectives to make sure that we've got something where everyone can perform.
We're hearing that a lot, Colin, and certainly a lot of people agree. What about remote working? Has this forced, or it's certainly been forced upon us through the pandemic with increased skills and flexibility, but certainly plenty of challenges. But the main thing you're saying is more, focusing on empathy, vulnerability, and when basically we can develop the skills. It's about behaviour first and foremost.
Yeah, that's right. We've downplayed the importance of emotional intelligence in the workplace for far too long, Jaynie. There was a report from Capgemini last week that less than half the organizations are actually investing in any kind. We call it soft skills. And yet these are the hardest things to change. And so, there's got to be that real focus this year. And I think with remote working, I was working remotely in 2001. And I think what stood in the way of remote working was not technology, it's the behaviors of leaders. And I think, often in these organizations, they still have this kind of concept where trust has to be earned rather than assumed. And I think all of the great workplace cultures around the world, trust is assumed. We bring people on board. We trust that they'll do the right thing. And then where people don't do the right thing, we address that individual. What we don't do is create this culture for the bad apples that spoil the fruit bowl. So I think with remote working, I think, particularly here in Australia, kind of CEOs and senior leaders have to have a proper plan to get people back into the workplace. We're good at one size fits all and quick fixes. Everyone can work from home forever. Well, that's not going to work because that's not the best way to collaborate on certain things. And we have to accept that some people really enjoy working from home and some people really don't. And so we have to find a really good mix whereby we bring people in and we trust them to do the right thing. And, we make it about results.
Colin D. Ellis, it was great to chat to you and get your insights, author of Culture Hacks. Do take care and thank you very much. Looking forward to seeing the new world of leadership.
Thanks, Jaynie.
Thank you.